I never imagined that at 80 years old, the memories of a terrible winter would return to haunt me with such force. I spent decades living in silence, keeping secrets that should have been buried with the end of the Cold War. But the weight of this truth is too great to carry to the grave. What happened in the Ural Mountains in 1959 was much more than a mountaineering tragedy. The death of those young people was covered up by carefully constructed lies. At that time, I was a soldier dedicated to the Soviet Union, part of a special unit sent to protect a highly classified site in the mountains. It was the height of the military race, and the experiments conducted there were dangerous but promising. We were part of a project that could change the course of the war, which, according to our superiors, justified any sacrifice. But I never thought that sacrifice would include the lives of innocent people. Our bunker was hidden deep within the mountains, an inaccessible place to the common eye. It was built to withstand attacks, but also to conceal the horrible things happening inside. Science advanced without ethical boundaries, and what we were creating there was more monstrous than any weapon. And it was precisely this secret that the Dyatlov Pass hikers accidentally discovered. When those 9 young people got too close to our post, I realized that something terrible was about to happen. The harsh winter was already a sufficient natural threat, but that night, the real danger did not come from the cold. The experiments had gone out of control, and the creatures we had created inside the bunker were about to be released. We knew that the genetically modified wolves were lethal, but we didn't know how far their savagery could reach. My superiors ordered that no one leave that mountain alive with knowledge of what they had seen. I was given the order to eliminate the hikers before they could report what they had witnessed. They had stumbled upon a secret that was never meant to be uncovered. I knew that if I failed, the fate of all of us, including the security of the Soviet Union, would be at risk. These memories resurface now with a weight I had never felt before. I am old, sick, and with each passing day I approach the end. But before death takes me, I must confess what happened that fateful night. Let the truth finally be known, even if it costs me my redemption. The ghosts of Dyatlov Pass still haunt me, and only by revealing what happened can I perhaps find peace. Our bunker was a reinforced concrete fortress, hidden under layers of snow and ice. No one would ever suspect that in that frozen wilderness, there was a military research center. The bunker was designed to withstand any attack and keep its secrets well guarded. What happened inside, however, was meant to remain hidden forever. It was a place of silence, where science had crossed boundaries never before imagined. Thick metal doors separated each section, and the cold white lights reflected the insensitive nature of what went on there. The walls were silent witnesses to the horrors committed in the name of progress. But we, the soldiers, were mere pawns, following orders without question. I didn't know exactly what the scientists were doing in the laboratories, but I knew something monstrous was being created. There was always tension in the air, a sense that we were meddling with forces beyond our control. The Soviet government was obsessed with the idea of creating the perfect biological weapon. Using genetic manipulation techniques that were ahead of their time, the scientists tried to create creatures that could serve as weapons in future conflicts. Wolves were chosen as the basis for these experiments due to their natural ability to hunt in extreme environments. However, the results were unpredictable and often catastrophic. The modified wolves were not only larger and stronger, but also more intelligent. They were perfect predators, able to adapt to any situation, and most importantly, blindly obey orders. At least, that's what we believed. Deep down, I always feared that one day we would lose control over those creatures. And that day was about to come. When the first reports of a group of hikers getting too close to the bunker surfaced, my superiors became alert. It wasn't the first time adventurers had ventured near, but this time, something was different. We knew the brutal climate of the Ural Mountains could be a natural defense, but we feared that if anyone discovered the entrance to the bunker, it would be impossible to cover up the truth. And that's exactly what happened. The night the Dyatlov Pass hikers camped near our post, the tension was palpable. We knew we were about to make a drastic decision. The experiment was unfolding, and the wolves were ready. They were released, and chaos ensued. The snowstorm that night was intense, and the icy winds howled around the mountains. I was on duty, as always, monitoring movement signals around the bunker. Visibility was almost non-existent, but the thermal cameras picked up the heat of approaching bodies. 3 of the hikers had strayed from the main camp, and that's when everything fell apart. They had no idea what was about to happen. From my post, I watched as Semyon Zolotaryov and Lyudmila Dubinina were the first to enter the danger zone. They were seeking shelter, unaware of the mortal threat lurking in the area. Perhaps they had noticed the faint glow coming from our camouflaged entrance, or maybe they were just trying to escape the cold. But as they approached the bunker's entrance, their fates were sealed. Through the security cameras, I saw the exact moment they discovered the small camouflaged opening in the rock. It was the entrance to hell. They tried to make their way inside, perhaps thinking they would find refuge, but what was on the other side of that door was far worse than the deadly cold of the mountains. There, the genetically modified creatures awaited their release. The wolves, already conditioned to attack any external threat, were triggered. With a simple signal, they were unleashed to do their work. The order was clear: eliminate anyone who tried to uncover what was in the bunker. There was no time to hesitate. Technology had created living weapons, and now those weapons were on the loose. It was too fast for the hikers to react. The wolves advanced like shadows in the night, invisible in the snowstorm. Lyudmila and Semyon's screams were quickly silenced, swallowed by the darkness. I watched it all, powerless, knowing there was nothing more that could be done. Their fate was sealed, and the operation had to continue. But the worst was yet to come. The other 7 hikers, still at the camp, had no idea they were being watched, and as soon as they realized their friends were missing, chaos would erupt. That night, the snow was both our ally and our curse. The wolves, with their white coats, vanished into the icy expanse, moving silently. Igor Dyatlov, the group's leader, was the first to realize something was wrong. He left the tent to search for his friends, and 2 others followed him. I knew that once they discovered Semyon and Lyudmila were missing, panic would begin to spread. Igor, his face hardened by the biting wind, looked around, not understanding what was happening. The silence was disturbing, and the darkness seemed to swallow any hope of finding his friends. His footsteps sank into the snow, and the tent became a distant point as he and the 2 others moved forward. The wolves, already unleashed, approached like shadows, moving with deadly precision. I watched everything through the cameras, powerless, knowing what was about to happen. The 3 hikers had no way of knowing they were being hunted. To them, the cold night was the greatest enemy, but soon they would discover that something much more lethal was lurking. With terrifying speed, the bionic wolves attacked. Igor was the first to feel the weight of the predator on his back, knocking him into the snow. His companions tried to run, but they had no chance. The muffled scream of terror that echoed in the night still resonates in my mind. The wolves were brutal, but precise. They didn't leave unnecessary traces. They attacked with the surgical precision that we, humans, had implanted in them. I knew I was watching a successful operation, but with every moment, my soul sank deeper into darkness. There was no glory in witnessing the deaths of those young people, only a profound emptiness. And yet, the orders were clear. None of them could leave that mountain alive. While the other hikers at the camp heard the distant screams, panic began to set in. They ran outside, confused, trying to understand what was happening. The footprints in the snow, mixed with bloodstains, led them to realize something terrible had occurred. Disorder and fear overtook the group. Some tried to return to the tent, while others ran in opposite directions. It was utter chaos. It was in this confusion that the wolves struck again. They were no longer just following my orders, they were hunting by instinct. The enhanced intelligence that the scientists had implanted in them had transformed into pure savagery. The snow, once white and pristine, began to stain red. The hikers' bodies fell one by one, and their desperate attempts to escape proved futile. All that remained were muffled screams carried away by the icy wind. By the end of the night, the camp was covered in a scene of destruction. I couldn't believe what had happened, but I knew there was no turning back. We needed to erase any trace of the carnage before the search began. And so, the preparations for the cover-up began, as if it were just another task in the long list of crimes hidden by the Soviet Union. The next morning, the bodies were already covered by a thin layer of fresh snow, as if nature were trying to conceal what had occurred. But what happened that night would never be fully buried. The hikers were dead, and now I had to act quickly to ensure that the true cause of their deaths was never discovered. Our orders came directly from the top levels of the government. It was a cover-up operation, and any mistake could expose the secret of the bunker and the experiments. We gathered a small group of soldiers, all trustworthy and experienced in following orders without question. Our objective was to rearrange the scene and make everything look like a tragic accident caused by the harsh weather conditions. The bodies had to be positioned in a way that suggested the young people had been caught off guard by a storm and had desperately tried to escape death by hypothermia. The first bodies we found were relatively intact, but it was clear that the marks from the wolves' attacks couldn't be explained naturally. The cuts and lacerations had to be disguised. We placed some of the bodies under trees, as if they had tried to light a fire to stay warm. We removed pieces of clothing from some and dressed others, creating the impression that they had tried to protect themselves with whatever warmth they could find. The goal was to create confusion and steer future investigators toward the wrong conclusions. The more mutilated bodies, like Lyudmila Dubinina's, required more careful work. The absence of her tongue and the missing eyes had to be marked as possible post-mortem interactions with wild animals. The idea was to make it seem like she had died first, and that local animals, attracted by the scent, had done the rest. This would explain the grotesque state of her corpse without raising suspicions about the true nature of the attacks. We also created false footprints around the camp. We used different boots to leave tracks that suggested the young people had hurriedly left the tent, perhaps scared by an avalanche or some other natural phenomenon. The footprints had to be disorganized, reinforcing the idea of panic. We destroyed part of the tent to simulate that they had cut through the fabric from the inside in a desperate attempt to escape the situation. After hours of manipulation and preparation, the scene was ready to be discovered by investigators. Everything was meticulously arranged to appear as a tragic accident, but deep down, I knew the true horror was buried in the depths of that mountain, in the bunker's laboratories. I had followed orders, but the weight of what we had done was already beginning to corrode my conscience. The news of the missing expedition spread quickly, and soon search teams began climbing the Ural Mountains in search of the young people. I knew that sooner or later, they would find the bodies. Our hope was that the narrative we created would hold, that the signs of panic and hypothermia would convince the investigators that there was nothing more than a tragedy in the mountains. But the real challenge was yet to come, controlling what would be said and what would be seen. The first bodies were found on February 26, 1959. The two men under the tree with scant clothing made the investigators believe they had been desperately trying to survive. Further ahead, other bodies were found, scattered in different directions, as if they had tried to return to the tent in the middle of the storm. The narrative of a natural factor began to take shape, but things became complicated with the discovery of Lyudmila and Semyon. Their severely mutilated bodies immediately raised suspicions. The absence of a tongue, the broken ribs, and the missing eyes couldn't be easily explained. This was where our cover-up plan began to show its flaws. While signs of hypothermia were present in some bodies, the more severe injuries didn't match a simple accident in the snow. We needed to closely control the investigations to ensure these inconsistencies didn't come to light. Theories quickly began to emerge. Some spoke of an avalanche, others of wild animal attacks. A group of investigators even suggested the hikers had been caught by supernatural phenomena. Every new hypothesis seemed more fantastical than the last, and the more rumors grew, the easier it became for us to manipulate the information. The bodies of Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov presented traumas that even the most creative couldn't justify as natural. Their fractured ribs, Semyon's crushed skull, and the absence of Lyudmila's tongue led investigators to a dead end. Every new detail seemed to contradict conventional explanations, but the mystery was only just beginning. The frozen and mutilated bodies became a central piece for speculation. This was exactly the chaos we were trying to create. So many unanswered questions that the truth would remain buried amid the confusion. Autopsies revealed more than anyone expected. High levels of radiation were found in some of the hikers' clothing, raising even more questions. Why would a group of young people on a simple skiing expedition be carrying clothes contaminated with radiation? This, combined with the nature of the injuries, paved the way for a flood of theories, from secret military tests to encounters with UFOs. Each theory was more fantastic than the other, but all served our purpose of keeping the truth hidden. I watched everything from afar, increasingly consumed by guilt. I knew that no matter how much we manipulated the evidence, reality would always find a way to haunt those who sought answers. But at the same time, fear kept me silent. I knew that if I dared to say a word, it wouldn't just be me who paid the price, but everyone I loved. The Soviet Union didn't forgive betrayals, and I had already seen what happened to those who dared defy the regime. The official narrative began to take shape. The investigators were pressured to follow a specific direction: hypothermia, desperation, human error. Any other explanation would be considered out of the question. The press was fed small pieces of information, carefully controlled, so that public opinion quickly accepted the idea of a tragic accident. However, the strange mix of injuries and the seemingly irrational behavior of the young people continued to intrigue many. The government quickly closed the official investigations, claiming there was no evidence of a crime. The families of the hikers received few explanations, and the case was filed away as an inexplicable tragedy. But what disturbed me was the idea that the ghosts of that night, though hidden, would never rest. The truth about the bionic wolves, the monstrous experiments, and the orders to eliminate would remain etched in my mind like invisible scars. Investigators who tried to dig deeper into the inconsistencies were pressured to abandon their research. Some disappeared mysteriously, others were silenced in more subtle ways, forced to change focus, or simply vanished from the public scene. Soviet control was relentless, and the shadow of the regime loomed over everything. I watched closely, trying to understand how far we would go to protect the dark secrets buried in the Ural Mountains. After the official investigations ended, the Dyatlov Pass incident turned into an urban legend. Rumors of military conspiracies, aliens, and supernatural forces proliferated, and this avalanche of theories made it easier for the government to keep the real secret buried. But for me, the silence was suffocating. The images of that night continued to torment me. I tried to ignore them, tried to convince myself that I was just following orders, but the truth always finds its way into the cracks of the mind. In the years that followed, I remained at my post, always alert to any trace of a threat to the operation. The scientists at the bunker were transferred, the project dismantled, and any remaining evidence of the creatures we created was destroyed. However, I knew that the secrets we guarded were bigger than ourselves. The weight of guilt and silence became a prison. Every step I took, every new mission I received, was a reminder of what had happened in that mountain and what I had done. Despite the meticulous cover-up, doubts never completely disappeared. Some reporters and independent investigators continued to search for answers. They interviewed indirect survivors, like Yuri Yudin, the only member of the group of hikers who didn't participate in the fateful trip. I tried, in every way possible, to ensure that he remained aligned with the official narrative. His frail health protected him, but it also made him an easy target for our manipulation. He was one of the last living pieces of that tragic puzzle. Over the years, many others died, some in suspicious accidents, others from natural causes. The Soviet Union knew how to silence any threat that might arise, and over time, the Dyatlov Pass incident turned into a distant story, muffled by the horrors of a Cold War that never seemed to end. The world moved on, and the secrets buried in the mountains disappeared into the mists of history. But unlike the world, I was never able to escape. I retired from the army with a smile on my face, but a heavy heart. I tried to build a life away from what had happened, but every day, the darkness of those events continued to consume me. I knew I would never be able to escape what I had done. The screams of the young people, the sound of the wolves approaching in the snow, the deadly silence after it all ended. These sounds replayed in my nightmares night after night. Time passed, and the regime I feared so much began to crumble. The Soviet Union, once powerful, fragmented, but even with the fall of the USSR, the secrets I had kept remained untouched. I had spent so many years being a guardian of lies, and now, in my final days, the guilt was finally consuming me entirely. Slowly, I distanced myself from everything and everyone. I had no close family, no friends with whom I could share my burden. I began to live like a ghost, avoiding any contact that might rekindle memories of the past. However, every harsh winter, the echoes of that fateful night in the Ural Mountains returned to torment me. I knew I was nearing the end of my life, and with it, perhaps one last chance to redeem part of what I had done. The bionic wolves, those creatures we tried to turn into war machines, were dead, but the experiments hadn't been completely erased. Behind the project was the desire to create something beyond human control. The genetic modifications we inserted into the wolves made them unstable. Their bodies began to collapse under the pressure of the mutations we forced upon them. By creating beings that were stronger, faster, and fiercer, we had also condemned them to self-destruction. What I witnessed, however, was even more terrifying. In the weeks following the experiments, the wolves began to behave unpredictably, until one by one, they died in violent and grotesque ways. One of them, the largest and most successful, simply exploded, scattering remains throughout the laboratory. No one could fully explain what had happened. It wasn't just the result of poorly planned genetic manipulation. It was something much deeper, as if we had crossed an invisible line, releasing a force that even the most experienced scientists couldn't comprehend. We played God and paid the price. Now, in my old age, I felt it was time to expose the truth. I needed to confess what happened, not just for what the hikers suffered, but also for the horrors we created and lost in the bunker. The bunker that once housed our experiments was sealed shortly after the wolves died, but what remained inside continued to haunt the region. Although the experiments were officially ended, rumors of strange sightings in the mountains began to circulate among the few local inhabitants. Some said they heard distant howls. Others reported seeing shadows moving quickly among the snow-covered trees. I knew these rumors were true, although the government insisted they were just legends. The wolves had died, but the presence we created never completely disappeared. It was as if the Ural Mountains themselves were cursed by our actions. The Ural Mountains, once just a backdrop of icy desolation and beauty, now carried a dark weight. The bunker that housed the experiments had been sealed, but something from there seemed to have escaped. In the years following the incident, locals and adventurers began reporting strange events. Whispering voices in the wind, shadows moving too quickly to be mere animals, and most disturbingly, distant howls, almost human, but filled with indescribable agony. I tried to ignore these reports. I knew the bionic wolves, the aberrations we created, were dead. But the more I heard about these stories, the more something inside me told me that the Ural Mountains would never be the same. What we did there wasn't just a violation of science, but an affront to nature itself. It was as if the soil, the rocks, and the wind carried with them the burden of our crimes. The bunker had been sealed, but the evil we unleashed was never truly contained. The scientists who participated in the experiments were transferred, disappearing into the machinery of other secret projects. Some of them vanished completely, victims of accidents that no one dared investigate. Others died mysteriously, silenced before they could say too much. I was one of the few who escaped this fate, but it brought me no relief. On the contrary, being alive meant carrying the guilt alone, unable to share it with anyone. Over time, the rumors began to intensify. Certain hunters and explorers who dared venture closer to the forbidden areas reported seeing glowing eyes among the trees at night, as if they were being watched. Some even claimed to have seen creatures moving unnaturally, standing on two legs for moments before disappearing into the darkness. But the Soviet government, in its final days of power, kept everything under wraps. They knew that any scandal related to secret experiments could tarnish the regime's image in its final fragility. My sleep became more and more restless. I woke up sweating, seeing images of the bunker in my dreams. The wolves, those that had died in such grotesque ways, seemed alive in my mind, their threatening presence returning to haunt me. I no longer knew if the reports of sightings were real or the result of my disturbed imagination. Perhaps, after so many years of lies and secrets, my mind was finally breaking. The legends about Dyatlov Pass began to grow out of control. Historians, journalists, and curious people from all over the world tried to piece together their own theories about what happened to the 9 young people who died in the mountains. Some suggested they were victims of a secret military test. Others spoke of paranormal phenomena. But I knew the truth. I had always known. Only now, I was ready to share it, and that terrified me as much as what I had done on that fateful night. Now, as I write these words, I know my time is running out. My hands tremble, and my days are numbered. With each beat of my heart, I feel that I am getting closer to the final judgment. I don't know if there will be forgiveness for me, but telling the truth is the only path I have left. Perhaps it will ease the weight I've carried for so long, or perhaps it will only confirm my eternal condemnation. The truth is simple but devastating. We created monsters. Deep in the bunker in the depths of the Ural Mountains, we tampered with genetics, modified creatures that were already deadly predators, and turned them into something much worse. The wolves we unleashed that night, in an attempt to protect our secrets, were not just fierce animals. They were the result of years of cruel experiments, where we tried to control nature, forcing it to submit to the whims of science and military power. The young hikers never stood a chance. When Semyon and Lyudmila found the entrance to the bunker, they accidentally exposed something that was never meant to be discovered. The wolves were released, and under direct orders from my superiors, I oversaw the massacre. Watching it, knowing I could have chosen differently, ate away at me over the years. I could have refused, but instead, I chose silence and blind obedience. Now, as the mysteries of Dyatlov Pass continue to fascinate the world, I know there is only one way to close this story. Reveal what we did, what we created, and what we destroyed. The deaths of the young people were only the beginning. The real tragedy is what those mountains continue to hide. The remnants of our failed experiments, the souls of those who were lost, and the echoes of a science that should never have been explored. If you are reading this account, know that the Ural Mountains still guard their secrets. And though I am about to leave, what we did there will live on forever, whether in legends, shadows, or in the nightmares of those who dare seek the truth. But for me, this is the end. I leave these words as my final testimony, in the hope that perhaps, someday, humanity will learn that certain boundaries should never be crossed. Now that everything has been said, my fate is sealed. I write these final words with the understanding that by revealing them, nothing will change for me. The ghosts of Dyatlov Pass will continue to haunt me until my last breath. What happened on that mountain can never be undone. There is no redemption for what I've done, and I know that my confession won't bring back the lives I took or silenced. The world will continue to speculate about what happened to those young people, creating new theories, new mysteries. But at its core, what remains is the weight of a bitter truth. Ambition and fear led us to destroy what was most sacred: life. We created monsters and paid a terrible price for it. It wasn't just the hikers who died on that mountain. A part of me died with them. The Ural Mountains will remain there, solitary, frozen, carrying the burden of the secrets we buried beneath their rocks and snow. Time may erase the evidence, but the guilt will never be erased. It lives in me, and will live on in anyone who dares tamper with forces that shouldn't be controlled. Now, as the darkness closes in and my breathing slows, I feel that my body, like those mountains, is about to collapse under the weight of the secrets it carries. The shadows come to take me, just as they took the hikers on that icy night. Let these words be my final legacy, a warning for those who come after. Whatever judgment awaits me, I accept. My actions have brought me to this point, and now, as life slowly leaves me, I conclude my account. The cold, the same cold that engulfed the young people, now wraps around me. I feel it in my bones, a final reminder of what happened in the Ural Mountains. May I find peace, or at least let the world know what we did. Here ends my confession. Let the truth survive time.